the insights and the wisdom that you can find inside a prison probably would shock people. I think in general, we've watched way too much Law and Order collectively as a community, and we have all sorts of impressions of who's inside and how scary it must feel at all times. I no longer take for granted the simplest things. Like I can turn the temperature on in my shower at a certain temperature. I can choose which color sheets I want to sleep in. And I think my body has learned my head doesn't listen to my body. So they're not letting my head near my heart because who knows what would happen there.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Guiding Light. I'm Jenna Carson.
I'm Sierra Larson.
Today, we are thrilled to be sharing the second part of our powerful conversation with Kimberly Malone, a spiritual director who works as a prison educator as well. So, welcome back, Kimberly. We're so grateful to hear from you again. So, we're going to dive into this conversation right now. So, Kimberly, for our part two of our conversation, we want to talk about how you apply the incredible gifts of spiritual games and your skill and expertise in prisons and in the ministry, the work that you do as an educator. So tell us about your work in prisons and how you got there. And we have just have so much to dive into. So
Yeah, I don't think it was something that I saw coming, as can happen in our life. In fact, my first sort of foray in prison work was when I was living outside DC. I started doing some workshops and I'd only done a couple, and there was something about them that was very compelling. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time, but it was right when I got another job offer in another state. And so that was the one thing that I thought, oh, I'm going to be sad to leave that opportunity. So I moved to New York. I am running a nonprofit for young people who are going to serve for a year, both internationally and domestically. So I'm running this volunteer organization. And I had grown up near New York, and then I'd spent significant time in DC and California. So in some ways, I felt like I was coming home, and with that was an expectation of I would know people, I would have a network that I was coming back to. And then I arrived in New York and I realized it was not as strong of a network as I had assumed. Like it was like my ex-boyfriend from high school's sister lives in another borough or, and I kind of resigned myself to, okay, I'm going to have to set up my life again and I'm going to have to build these connections. And while I was doing that, I took the bus one night from in New York City from Queens to Brooklyn, which is a few hours commute. And I brought a book with me. And on the way home, I was reading this book. It was called Random Families by, I don't remember the author, but it was a sociology book where the author chose a few random families from the Bronx and followed them for 30 years. So as you read this book, it reads like a documentary. You're just sort of following these folks as they grow up and as their kids grow up and as their kids have kids. And I was so engrossed in the book that I missed my bus stop to go home. And the part that I was reading was Jessica in the book was visiting her boyfriend at Rikers and had taken the bus to go to Rikers. And I was on that very same bus. And that bus all of a sudden stopped in front of Rikers. And so it was this super surreal moment where you're like, this is the bus that Jessica's talking about in the book that I'm reading right now. And I did eventually figure out my way back home. And then, unlike anyone in New York, I asked myself, how do I get into Rikers Island jail? And I started looking around for organizations that were offering programming in the jail, and I ended up working with Prison Fellowship for a few years, offering life skills classes in that context. And now I think I could put my finger on it, is that these were the hungriest classrooms I had ever encountered. These were classrooms full of people who, whether out of boredom or desperation or all sorts of different motivations, were really eager to self-reflect. They were eager to sort of look inside of themselves and figure some things out in a way that when I come outside, everyone's so busy. They're not necessarily thinking about, their motivations or what's going on inside of them. Actually, my first class there, I taught a 3-month class on forgiveness, which was such a fascinating conversation and context to have that, to ponder that together. And so I was there for about 3 years, and then I moved to Sing Sing Prison, working with a group called Rising Hope, which now I am the president of. And there I was invited to teach a class on spirit, a college level class on spirituality, in that context. And again, just the insights and the wisdom that you can find inside a prison probably would shock people. I think in general, we've watched way too much Law and Order collectively as a community, and we have all sorts of impressions of who's inside and how scary it must feel at all times. And the reality is, this is a space where there are some people, and again, I don't interact with the general population. I'm interacting with the people who are self-choosing to come to programming, educational programming, and so that's a cross section of the prison. But within that cross section, there are folks who have been navigating living in traumatic situations for a very long time. There are folks who are at peace even though they are so restricted. I don't know, I no longer take for granted the simplest things. Like, I can turn the temperature on in my shower at a certain temperature. I can choose which color sheets I want to sleep in. I mean, the littlest things are things that people don't necessarily have access to anymore. And yet, in that context, people sometimes are calm or peaceful, or all the fruits of the spirit that we're like looking for, you might find inside. And so I love offering education in that space. In the last few years, my full-time job now has been running college programs inside the prison. And I love how I am handing these students tools to be create to organize their thoughts, to be critical thinkers, to be academics, to become academics, so that they can then translate the wisdom that they have learned, whether that's a phone call conversation back home, or whether they're released and they go on and share with a much broader audience the lessons that they've learned.
Wow. Wow. I don't even know what to say because it's such important work. It's so powerful. What else do you want to share about what you've seen in this space and the transformation you've seen people go through spiritually?
Yeah. So last year at this time, I was teaching a class called Religion and Spiritual Growth. And as you might imagine, in this context, it was a college level class. It was a BA class at this men's maximum security facility. And 23 students came into the room from 23 different backgrounds. Some were deeply locked into their beliefs, and some were wary that they had to take this class that had spirituality or religion in the title as a requirement. And some were coming from Jewish and, I mean, just so many Muslims, so many different backgrounds. So that's the context that we're in. And I am trying to figure out how to invite everyone to grow in this class so that they would start, finish the class in a different place than they started, whatever that meant for them. And one of the activities that I invited them to was a spiritual game. I said, here's the setup. I want you to design your own spiritual practice for 30 days and then do it. And then let's reflect on what that was. And again, within the constraints, it's one of the reasons why I love going to this, teaching in this context is with so many constraints. You don't even have the internet. People can't do research in the same way that they would in a college class on the outside. People get incredibly creative. So, one of the students, we had encountered this Buddhist meditation, this loving kindness meditation at one point in the course materials. And so this student decided for 30 days, he would take advantage of going out onto the yard every day for 30 days. And he would sit in one spot, and whoever he could see in his sight, he would quietly send them a loving kindness meditation. That was his practice for the month. And one day he sat down, and it just so happened in his line of sight were the guards as well, which hadn't happened before. And all of a sudden he thought to himself, how generous am I going to be with this? Am I also sending the loving kindness meditation to everyone? And he decided to, and that was his practice. So again, when you think of who's inside, do you imagine someone sitting on the yard sending everyone in their sight like a loving kindness meditation? Or just one student, he decided his practice was that he would not say unkind words for a whole month, except he also played on the soccer team, and somehow the other opposing team learned about his commitment and started just laying it on him because they knew he wouldn't be able to respond. And he came to class the next week and was like, Mrs. Malone, this is really, really hard. And so just I love that if folks in that space can come up with and design their own little practices, how can we, in our daily life, what are ways that we can, just in this last week, I was reading the book Shift by Ethan Kross. It's a new book that came out about managing your emotions. And I'd only read the first chapter. And in the first chapter, he talked about how your emotions can, if you can tap into them and be in control of turning them up or turning them down, actually they're like a force that you can play with. And I was so intrigued by that thought that I am an avid swimmer. I have a practice of swimming in the mornings. And in the pool the next morning, I decided I am going to play with Ethan Kross's emotion idea. And for a few laps, I'm going to pick an emotion and I am going to swim it out. So, like, I picked anger, and for, 3 or 4 laps, I'm like, what are the things in my life that are making me angry right now? And then I picked shame, and then I picked joy, and then I picked like, these different emotions, and I swam completely differently according to the different emotions. So again, in your day, I think there's all sorts of invitations to not just feel overwhelmed with like, I feel like I should be further along, or I feel like I'm not in the place that I want to be, but breaking it down into the tiniest steps to get more comfortable with that area, whether it's physical, social, emotional, spiritual, mental, in all sorts of different ways. We can turn, like, shine a little flashlight in our life on different areas.
Kimberly, I'm thinking about you're just helping me think about how all of this is so interconnected. So these pillars of well-being, right? Social, spiritual, physical. You shared a story with me. I don't know if you'd feel comfortable sharing it with our listeners about this disconnect you had had from your body for many years. And I'm thinking about how it's common for anyone who's been through any kind of trauma, and I think that's virtually everyone, just to disconnect from the body in moments when there are a lot of high stakes and emotions. And then even in moments that maybe aren't high stakes, but feel high stakes because of the trauma. So I'm thinking about incarcerated individuals. Trauma is huge, usually in backgrounds, and if not before prison, during prison. Can you share that story of how you realized you had this disconnect between your brain and your body?
Sure. So, uh, in my background, I have been a counselor at a drug recovery program. I have been a program director at a homeless shelter. As I mentioned, I've been a live-in caretaker for folks with disabilities. I keep on for a long time, I was just drawn to these spaces where people were navigating trauma. And in hindsight, I think I was trying to heal myself by trying to care for other people, which is a common practice that happens. And at some point, it came to a head, and I needed to step away. And I realized, like, I need healing. And the way that that came out for me is that my my body started speaking. And what I mean by that is, like, randomly my teeth would start chattering, or I would be in the shower and all of a sudden I'd like cry in the way that I would imagine a mom who lost a child might cry. And I'm like, what is going on here? And I was so freaked out that I was more open and eager and than in any other time in my life to like head towards therapy and, anything that I could sort of find. And a friend of mine had mentioned somatic therapy, and I hadn't heard of that. I wasn't familiar with it. I was living in California at the time, and I easily found this somatic therapist. And the way my friend described it to me is like, there's talk therapy, but that in somatic therapies, there are some things, the body knows the score. There are things that live inside your body that maybe you need someone to help you work it out in a body way. And because whatever was coming up for me was coming up so clearly in my body, I thought, okay, this sounds like a good idea. I'm going to check this person out. So I walk in, I sit down. So simple. She said, I just want you to plant your feet on the ground, and I want you to just scan your body and just see what's going on in your body, and just let me know what you are experiencing. And I immediately freaked out. I had no idea how to answer her question. I had no idea how someone might answer that question. And what popped into my head was this word picture of, it was as if my head was the king of my kingdom, and my body was the kingdom. And I had always thought that I was a really great king because nothing really went out of line. Everyone sort of stayed in shape and didn't really speak. And so I thought, I'm doing great. And it was as if in this moment, the somatic therapist had asked me, tell me about elbow. What's going on with knee? What about big toe? And I'm like, who are they? Like, I don't even know the subjects in my kingdom. What is going on here? And I had this picture of just like my head was completely disconnected from my body. And here I am living just in my head. And that I thought I was doing great because my head was the only voice that I could hear. And as I shared with Jenna, I never went back. I think the somatic therapist realized I was sort of freaking out, and she said, "Okay, let's try this from a different angle. Like, when you're hungry, what does that feel like? Or when you have to go to the bathroom?" And I was like, "I don't know. I just eat when it's appropriate time to eat, and I go to the bathroom when I have time in my day." So I left there, and I was like, "I think there's a problem, but I think I have an idea of what I need to do." And I played a spiritual game. And the game was, again, this visual of like, I think my body is actually protecting my heart, my most intimate memories and aspects of who I am. And I think my body has learned my head doesn't listen to my body. So they're not letting my head near my heart, because who knows what would happen there. And so I sort of felt like I needed to rebuild this relationship with my body so that I could access my heart. And so I started playing these games. I was like, all right, for 1 week, I am going to listen every single time I have to feel like I have to go to the bathroom. I'm going to listen to that right then, and I'm going to go. And then as I walked down the hall in the school building, I was like, see, I'm listening, I'm going. Or after that, I would, for a month, I decided every Sunday I was going to walk to CVS and I was going to choose a new nail polish. And I was going to spend that Sunday evening painting my nails and just feeling all week long what it felt like to have my nails painted to see, do I like that color? It was small little things, but it was ways that I was trying to communicate to my body, I see you, I'm listening, I'll pay attention. And fast forward, as I mentioned, I'm a swimmer. Oh my gosh, swimming is like a group project with everybody. Head, hands, lungs, like toes. We are all working together now every morning, sort of in this space, playing together. And I feel like I have access now to important information from my emotions, from my body, from my head. Like we can all be at the table now in a way that that couldn't happen earlier.
Thank you. I love that that experience that resonates with me. I think I might have shared this before on the show, I'm not sure, but I've been in since April in the process of trying to get a conclusive diagnosis of having myasthenia gravis, which is like a disease where your brain and your muscles literally can't talk to each other through the nerves. Like they just don't connect. And it was after a season of not listening to my body at all. Like it didn't matter if I was hungry, didn't matter if I was thirsty, it didn't matter if I was tired, it didn't matter if I needed to go to the bathroom. I had to work, I had to get stuff done. I had to like not stop, you know? And it almost felt like my body was like, fine. You don't want to listen to us, we're not listening to you, you know? And it wasn't until, that all kind of came to a head that I'm like, okay, what did you need to say? Like what? I'm listening now. What do you need? And it really slowed me down. It slowed me down in a way that I don't think I've ever slowed down before. And a lot of times, like you're saying, there's when we have that disconnect and not only like not listening, but just kind of like quieting your body and what it's trying to tell you, hushing it, silencing it, it's gonna go against you and have, some of these reactions. And so I just love the idea of really working in tandem and with, the head and the body and working through that to heal the heart, like you're saying, and that this I'm just kind of thinking about it now as I'm talking about it, but like as you said that, I'm like, what is in the heart? And having to think through, okay, like Sierra, why can't you take a break? Why can't you rest? What is in the heart what's from the trauma or whatever that makes you feel like you can't stop? And so I love how you shared, all of that happening, but there's something in the heart. There's a trauma, there's a pain in the heart. And when you listen to your body and listen to and work through it with your head and your body and all together, you can really heal the heart in that way. And I love that.
Goes back to that like heart analogy
Hmm.
of I didn't even have access to that space. And to be able to live fully, I think, is what God wants for us. Is, I mean, when I go into the prison, I'm thinking, I want everyone who is in my class or who is in the program to be able to have the freedom to know who they are and what they have to offer without the restrictions or the constraints or the expectations that maybe others have put on them, to be fully free to just offer their perspective or their voice. And I feel like only collectively, when I think about the Bible, it's so many different cultures and voices over such a long period of time. And in a way, I feel like we also need to continue to add our voices to be able to try to even figure out who God is and what is going on here in the world and God's kingdom. I think that we individually cannot know, and we need one another. And in order for us to be able to fully see, we need so many different perspectives. And I often think that the voices of those who are inside prison is a very interesting voice, because outside, I find so many people living in fear of other people's expectations of them, and like, what if I did this terrible thing and people found out that I sometimes think or do terrible things, then no one would accept me. And what's interesting about a collective of people living inside prison is that they are living on the other side of that. And they're finding there is still mornings to wake up in, and there's still days to follow, and there is still life on the other side of those lines that we're so afraid of crossing. And in that space, there is wisdom that they can share back with us of like, there's still life. And so I want them to experience that. I want us to experience their wisdom. I want I want us collectively to be free.
I want us collectively to be free. It's beautiful. And I think that, I can't say I know this, but I think that God wants us all to be free. That's my belief, right?
Or so far, that sounds in character.
Well, Kimberly, you are such a light in and outside of the systems that you work. Thank you for sharing your light with us. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners? Anything else on your heart right now?
I mean, I think I would just invite them to look around at their life and to be playful with those games. I know someone in the room might be heading off into a new marriage relationship, and I play games with my husband. We started dating on the 27th of the month, and we got married on the 27th of the month. And so we play a game. We call it our date of the union. And every 27th of the month, we check in and are like, how's married life going for you? Anything we need to start, stop, continue? It actually happens to be the 27th today. And so tonight we will have our date of the union. So that's like a game you can play with someone else, or, you know, thinking about, yeah, thinking about just setting up in your life. Choose a time frame, whether it be an hour, a day, a week, a month, a season, or a year, that you want to play with a commitment. Ask yourself, take a step back and ask, like, where do I feel like I want to grow? Where do I feel like I want to pay attention to? And then follow that up with an actual practice to remind yourself of that commitment. I'll give one last example. That was one of my favorite ones that I did back in 2015, which is heading into the fall. I started pondering, like, God, what should I think about in this next year? And for whatever reason, the phrase made in your image just kept on coming up for me. And I was like, what does that really mean? Like, that's kind of crazy if you think about it. And so, in designing a spiritual game for the Made in Your Image year, I decided that I started thinking about if God was like an artist and I went into an art gallery and maybe I couldn't speak directly with that artist, what could I learn about that artist just from looking at their artwork? And so I looked around and I wondered, like, could you look at an art piece and be like, the artist was probably in this phase of their learning or growing? And I just wondered. So using that as a framework, I chose a tree about 3/4 of a mile from my house at the time. And I walked to that tree every single morning. And I stood in the same exact spot and I lined up a picture of that tree. And I took a picture of that tree every single day that I was able to for that year. I have over 300 pictures of this one tree. And I imagine, like, if I'm going into the gallery every morning and looking at that artist's creation, what does that say about the artist? And I'm in a space that has seasons very distinctly. If you ever really want to experience spring, take a picture of every single day of winter. And there was something that happened inside my heart of like, oh, it's coming. I can see the grass is growing. Like, there's something emerging now. And I was waiting for the day that my tree popped its leaves. And every single day I was like, not yet, not yet. Almost, we're almost there. And I learned so much from just that rhythm and that practice. And it was fun. And all these other things came from it. I would pass people on my way. And so eventually people in the neighborhood would be like, what are you doing? And I would tell landscaper at the apartment complex about my tree. And one day I was so sad because I was about to head to on a work trip. And it was the moment that I thought fall was about to happen. And that landscaper went over to my spot and took a picture of my tree and sent it to me while I was in California. Or just so many different ways to sort of, again, don't just desire the lesson, but like cultivate a practice that will remind you, put you in the right circumstance and situation to actually learn more or grow in that way that you want to grow.
That's so powerful. Thank you again so much, Kimberly. To all of you listeners, thank you for joining us today. We echo Kimberly's invitation to go play. I'm Jenna Carson,
I'm Sierra Larson.
and we hope that you follow the peace